What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Bass Fishing Declassified. In this video, I want to talk to you about my new favorite summertime technique, oversized mid-strolling. A lot of anglers are talking about fishing Demiki rigs and smaller little minnow baits on spinning rods to catch suspended bass. I don't like fishing spinning rods that much though, guys, and I try to avoid them as much as possible. So I've been experimenting with some bigger flukes and some stouter hooks that I can throw on bait casting equipment. And I've caught a ton of big fish and numbers over the past 2 summers fishing these larger flukes with a very unique hook. Basically what I'm doing is pairing up these 5.5-inch flukes, or even flukes that are bigger than that. I have one here that's an 8-inch depth Sakamata shad, and I'm pairing that up with the core tackle TUSH hook, the ultimate swim bait hook. If I hold this here, I got to hold both these. Give me a second. There we go. Got the 4/0 3/8 TUSH hook there on that Hog Farmer 5.5-inch Spunk shad. If you've watched my Fish to Moment YouTube channel, you see me throw this rig a ton. I have caught literally hundreds of fish this summer and hundreds of fish last summer on this rig. It is my #1 producing rig for both size and numbers. It is an absolutely awesome technique. And the cool thing about this technique, again, is that you can take advantage of this new mid-strolling Demiki rig trend with bait casting equipment, which is really good for me because I just hate fishing spinning rods and, again, avoid them at all costs. The idea behind this technique is you're basically trying to target fish that are suspended in the middle of the water column. And I've found that I can actually catch these fish with this rig even without forward-facing sonar. And I actually catch more fish without forward-facing sonar using this technique than I do with it. Basically what I'm going to do is cast that bait out on a school of fish that I identify on my down imaging and 2D sonar. If I see those fish suspended off the bottom, let's say 5 to 10 feet off the bottom, I will try to work that bait above the level of those fish, working it in the middle of the water column, and those fish will come up to eat this bait. The bigger profile of that fluke, like that Hog Farmer Spunk shad in that 5.5-inch size, or the bigger fluke I've been throwing, which again is that 8-inch depth Sakamata shad right here, they'll draw fish from a pretty good distance, and these fish will come up 10 to 15 feet to come eat this bait, even in pretty stained water. And that's one thing I like about throwing these bigger baits, is I can actually target these suspended fish when the water visibility is less than 3 feet. I catch a lot of these fish in 1.5 to 3 foot of water visibility, where that Demiki rig on a standard spinning rod with a small little tiny fluke starts to lose its effectiveness. But these bigger flukes will draw those fish still and get some really big bites. I'm pairing this bigger depth Sakamata shad, that 8-inch fluke, with a 7/0 1/4-ounce TUSH hook. And the reason I go with that 1/4 ounce is because the Sakamata shad here is a heavyweight version, so it has a lot of salt in it. So you don't need as heavy of a hook. That 1/4 ounce 7/0 is perfect for it. And all you need to do with these baits, again, guys, is basically just cast them out and then get them over the level of the fish, and then twitch your rod and work that bait like you would kind of a standard fluke if you're fishing one up shallow. You don't need a really fancy retrieve with this. Basically just twitch that bait above the level of those fish, and if they're aggressive, they're going to come up and absolutely smoke it. I have had some success with this bait fishing a few different retrieves that are a little bit unique. One of them is kind of throwing this bait as if I would fish a hair jig, where I cast it out, let it sink all the way down to the bottom, burn the bait up, let it fall, burn the bait up, let it fall, and those fish will eat it, again, just like they would a hair jig. And it is a great alternative to that hair jig, but it also is more versatile because it doesn't only target those fish that are really tight to the bottom, it'll target those fish that are suspended up really high, and you can twitch this bait above the level of those fish too. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. Kind of a hair jig, crossover with a swim bait, crossover with a Demiki rig. It's kind of just a cool, versatile rig. I also have found that I catch a lot of schooling fish, especially on this really big Sakamata shad, when those fish are setting up within 5 feet of the surface. If I see a lot of fish kind of roaming and cruising around, busting on shad, I'll throw this big bait and just fan cast over open water or points and things like that. And when there's a lot of fish in the area, this bait has more drawing power than your standard little Demiki rigs, and the fish will come 20, 30 feet. You'll see them wake under the surface to come eat this thing, and they'll absolutely crush it, especially if there's big gizzard shad in your fishery. And I think that's kind of the key with this rig, guys. You don't want to throw this giant Sakamata shad or even this 5.5-inch Spunk shad when you have really small forage in your lake. If you're dealing with a lot of like 2 and 3-inch threadfin shad, it's not really the best deal for this. You want to have bigger forage that those bass are feeding on. A lot of lakes in my area, like Table Rock Lake in Missouri, Beaver Lake in Arkansas, or Grand Lake in Oklahoma, have big gizzard shad that are 5 to 8, maybe even 12 inches long. So a 5.5-inch fluke is really not all that big, and even this big 8-inch Sakamata shad isn't that big of a meal for these fish because they're used to eating a gizzard shad that's twice as big as this almost sometimes. So it's not really that intimidating of a bait to the fish, it's more intimidating, I feel like, to the angler. So what I would say is definitely give this technique a try if you have those bigger forage in your lake. I think that this is just a technique that, again, is kind of being overlooked for these smaller little Demiki baits, the little freeloader style baits, because that's what you see a lot of guys on the professional levels fishing with right now. But again, I have just found that this technique gets just as many bites for me, if not more, and allows me to fish in that dirtier water where other anglers aren't really trying this technique. The benefit, again, for like the 5th time I've said it, is that I can throw it on a bait caster too, which I cannot overstate because I just love fishing baits on heavier equipment. I can horse the fish in, get them in the boat quickly, and get back out there. For my gear, I'm throwing with these 2 fluke rigs or oversized mid-strolling rigs. For the smaller 4/3/8 ounce tush with that Hog Farmer Spunk shad, I'm going to be throwing that on a Denali 7'2" medium heavy power worm and jig rod. This is a fast action rod in the Denali covert lineup, and I'll pair that with 12-pound fluorocarbon line. I feel like that 12-pound fluorocarbon is essential when fishing this little rig because it allows it to sink a little bit faster and move more naturally through the water when it's falling. I've had guys who try to throw it on 15 to 20-pound test with this exact setup, and they have not had as much success. And then I've had them switch to that 12-pound test, and they will double their bites. I don't know why it makes that big of a difference. I wouldn't think it would, but for whatever reason, it really, really does. So make sure you're throwing this on 12-pound fluorocarbon if you are going to try this setup or this technique, because it can have a really big impact on your success. I just pair that with a standard 6-to-1 gear ratio Abu Garcia Black Max reel. This is a 6-year-old reel I got for $30 at Walmart, and I'm not sponsored by Abu Garcia or anything. I just picked up these reels because I was on a budget when I was a student, and so I've been throwing them for a long time and they still work, so not a bad deal for me there. And then for that bigger 8-inch depth Sakamata shad on that 7/0 1/4 ounce tush, I'm pairing it on a heavier rod. This is a Denali Covert Light 7'6" heavy power, moderate fast action bait casting rod. It's actually a pretty specific rod. It's designed for swim jigs and has a little bit more bend to it than your standard 7'6" rod. It's a little bit more parabolic, and the reason I like that is because a lot of these fish will come up and hit this fluke and then maybe not get the entire thing in their mouth because of how big that bait is. I mean, that bait has a lot of mass there, and even if I hit it by the head, it might kind of compact in their mouth, and you need to give them a second to actually get the entire bait in their mouth. So by having a moderate fast action rod with a little bit of bend to it, it gives them an extra second to get that bait into their mouth. And I wouldn't say it's like the end all be all. If you just have like a 7'6" heavy fast action rod, it also works. But if you have the option to get a moderate fast action with this technique, you'll probably end up getting 1 or 2 extra fish in the boat. As far as my line goes, I'll usually end up going with heavier line for this, 17 to 20 pound fluorocarbon. I don't find it makes as much of a difference with this big bait, the line size, and I'm usually fishing it in relatively shallower water than this 5.5-inch Spunk shad, so you can go and get away with a little bit heavier line, again 17 to 20 pound fluorocarbon. And then for my reel, it's again that 6-3-1 Abu Garcia Black Max, same reel from the last one, and I picked it up at the exact same time. I have like 10 of these I picked up all at once, and they're all like 6 to 7 years old, and they're all still working. So that's kind of my little setup there, guys. It's a technique I talk about all the time, and I feel like guys on the Fish the Moment YouTube channel are probably getting sick of me talking about it, but I catch so many fish on it, and it's so effective for me, both with forward-facing sonar and without, and it makes it something that gives me an advantage over other anglers on the lake because there's just not very many guys doing it. So if you haven't tried this already, highly recommend picking up some of these core tackle, tush hooks. in the 7/0 quarter ounce and that 4/0 3/8 ounce. Those are my two favorite sizes. Pick up a pack of those Hog Farmer Spunk shads in the 5.5 inch size, and you can still get some of these 8-inch Sakamata shads on Tackle Warehouse. A lot of you guys pick up the 6 and 7-inch sizes. Not as many guys are throwing that 8-inch size, but again, it's my 1 and 2 producers this summer. This 8-inch fluke and that 5.5 inch fluke are my two producers this summer that have had the most and biggest fish in the boat for me. So definitely try them out if you want to try some new techniques on your lake. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like down below and subscribe to the Bass Fishing Declassified YouTube channel for more content like this. See you guys in the next video.